Welcome to Never Rewrite. I'm Isaac Askew.
And I'm Jeffrey Sherman. And today we're going to ponder, if you know to ignore an error, is it still an error? This is something that's come up repeatedly in my work, where a general piece of advice I give people is, hey, if you don't know where to begin by fixing errors in the log, because they are either meaningless and noise, and they'll keep get in the way of actually looking and understanding errors, or they're meaningful, and there's a good place to start if you don't know where to start. But just the idea of, okay, clean the logs. And I've gotten weird pushback of, oh, well, but this is an error, so it should be in the log. But I'm like, but what are you going to do? What are you going to do about this error if you see it in the log?
Mm-hmm.
I guess another way to put it is, it's a philosophical question of, if you see an error, are errors something supposed to be fixed? To me, if there's an error in the log, it's something you should be fixing. You shouldn't. I come from finance. If your logs have errors in them, that's a problem. And so the correct error rate in your logs is 0. If it's something that you could ignore, then it's not an error, it's a warning.
Yeah.
And anything that's an error is something you have to jump on.
Right. Yeah. We've had somewhat of a discussion about this at a few different companies, and usually it pops up by installing and using Sentry for exception handling. It'll alert whenever an exception happens, but some people abuse exceptions.
Yes.
And they throw exceptions when they're actually kind of like interesting things, like a customer ran into this issue, but it's okay. Like, we'll still keep going. And so I'm like, well, is that really an exception? Because we want Sentry to be reporting and alerting on channels that are things we should actually be able to action and fix and drop everything right now. Like, something bad happened. It hurt the customer experience. But is that an exception, or is it more like just an info or a warning, like you're saying? Just
And conversely, people are like, oh, well, if I reduce this from an exception or an error to a warning, no one's ever going to look at it. Well, that kind of speaks to the same cultural problem of, you're not looking at your logs.
Yeah.
Right? The only way somebody's going to see this is if it's an error, but it's not really an error. That means you're not looking at your logs proactively.
Yeah.
And very quickly, you won't look at your error logs either, because it'll just be all noise.
Yeah, logs in general are just kind of a passive way of understanding your system. Like, I feel like generally what you do is, like, if something weird happened and you didn't have any kind of fatal error that occurred, you look through your logs to see, oh, what could have happened. Like, if a customer complained, then you go through your logs and see, oh, okay, it happened here, it happened there. Ah, okay, maybe this is the issue. That's passive. That's like reacting to something. And then the exception would be like the proactive. Something bad happened, and I'm going to react to it now, and try to catch what's going on and help the customer out
Right. The
much more
idealized
quickly.
version these days would be, anything that you should react to immediately would be a metric. And there'd be alerting and there'd be telemetry. And then logs would be everything passive that you need to understand what went wrong after the fact. So
Right.
you'd have the metric to do the alerting, and then logs would be understanding after the fact. And
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, that's okay. Like, that's actually, like, yes, that is the ideal situation. But there's also, some level of background noise that's always going to be happening that is very difficult to have alerts that aren't going on, false positive. But you need to know, you need to look at this stuff like, hey, this weird, if you say made validation errors, if you lowered them from errors because you ignore them to warnings, if the number of warnings is going upwards, that's a sign of something going wrong that's
Yeah.
not totally broken, but you still need to look at.
Right. This kind of reminded me. I know this is slightly off topic, but still related to errors versus info and warning. Um, but like there was an issue with like customer invoicing, and we don't
Okay.
really know. Like a customer was able to be billed automatically for the amount they owed. However, and that wasn't nothing like an exception wasn't thrown. It's like the actual billing and the money movement and all that what happened. But the customer complained and they looked into the issue and the amount was off by a few dollars or something. And they're asking why was it off by a few dollars. So the in that
Reasonable
case,
question.
hmm?
I said that's a very reasonable question.
Yeah. So that's the case where you want to look through your logs and see if you have good logging, you can see maybe how a calculation occurred, or if you have really granular logs, you can kind of see like this
Hmm.
is this plus the tax plus we took away this some money you already had in your account as like a credit you had, that kind of thing, and understand, oh, okay, this is why it ended up that balance. Um, so that's like kind of an example recent, where there's like something's wrong in the system with how it added up, but it wasn't an exception or an error to actually prevent it from happening. So the
Mm.
logs in that case are there just to help you paint the picture.
Yeah, it's still React. The idea of logs are still for
Hmm.
debugging after the fact, and then your more telemetry metrics are for alerting,
Yeah.
which
So
then goes. Hmm?
if you know to ignore an error, is it still an error though?
Yes, that's the
Yeah.
question. I would say no. If you know to ignore it, it's not an error. If it's something that your system can hit and move on, then it's
Yeah.
not an error. Like one example I remember arguing with years ago was we were working with the REST API and we had retries.
Hmm.
And so, every now and then you'd see a retry in the logs and they were logged as errors because it'd be like connection timeout,
Yeah.
retry. It's like,
Yep.
well, the connection timeout
Exactly.
is an error. It's like, but we retried and we were going to retry up to 3 times. So it's not really, the first one's not an error. The first one's maybe an info, like, hey, connection timeout retrying is an info.
Hmm.
Connection timeout twice, in warning, maybe. 3 times, now I'm giving up. Now you've got an error. But instead,
Yeah.
this would be no. They were like canonical. I know every connection failure is an error. But what are you going to do about it? You aren't going to do anything about it.
Yeah, it's almost like a business error versus like a logic error. Like
Hmm.
technically, the first failure that you are going to retry is an error, but if the business is not, like, if they have retries built in and it handles it still and eventually, then yeah, sure. So that is kind of a fun philosophical distinction.
That's a good way to put it. It's a system error versus a code error, and code errors may or may not be important. System errors are
Hmm.
important.
If a customer's money moves after the third attempt, from their perspective, no, the system worked. It moved. It paid the
Right.
person. Yeah.
So, going back to the question, are you
Hmm.
would you remove or lower errors that you are ignoring in your system?
I think I would lower them. I think if they're important enough, I report to Sentry, or I do something to alert a channel, to make it
Mm-hmm.
visible. If it's something people should act on if it happens, then that's an error or an alert essentially. Like, hey, the system kept going, but we should really investigate this. Would be kind of an alert to where it's like we caught it and kind of let somebody know about it. I guess there's like
Mm-hmm.
an exception, which is just like the death of the application. Something super bad happened versus something really bad happened, but it only happened once or twice in a month. We should definitely look into it versus here's a bunch of things that are happening in our system
It's on fire.
that we can use later in case somebody runs into an issue and we need to understand in retrospect what happened here. But it's not something where everyone should jump off what they're doing currently and like look into the issue. So I think that's the distinction. Is those levels is the how important it is for you to switch context right now and drop what you're doing. And if it's drop what you're doing, that's an error or an alert or exception. And if it's it's fine for now, we think. That's probably like a lower, like a warning kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think one thing that I did in finance very, decades plural ago was we did proactive log grooming. We would periodically go through the logs and look
Mm-hmm.
and see if anything strange stuck out at us and get concerned about it. And since leaving finance, I don't think I've ever seen any company doing that. And a few times where I've done it, like, hey, I connected to the log server and I downloaded the last 100,000 errors or exceptions in the logs. And
Mm-hmm.
I ran some grep foo and I said, hey, these are the 10 most common exceptions and they cause 90% of the exceptions in the logs. Why don't we just fix them?
Mm-hmm.
And people look at me like, wow, how did you think of that? Well,
They're
I
right there.
didn't. I learned from experience watching, high performance developers in finance.
We did something similar to this, and I think there's a cool thing about this. Moving to Sentry, for example,
Hmm.
if you move to Sentry and use something like Sentry for exception handling, Sentry charges you for the events that you send it. So you're almost somewhat incentivized to make sure that your system is not spamming you with events because you don't want to pay for all those. So
Hmm.
you'll go through and either fix them or find a way to download them, downgrade them from an exception to a log. Like you
Ah,
try catch it and then put in a log instead. So we've been doing that in a separate project of mine where we'll go through and find all the different exceptions that were thrown in the last month. We actually have a monthly calendar meeting. Be like, oh, here's all the different Sentry exceptions, and then we go through them with the team one by one and be like, okay, is this something we should fix? Is this actually an exception, or is this something we handle with different retries? And then we clean them up. We do the grooming thing you're talking about. And again, the good thing about that is you're saying you're incentivized to
right.
have that kind of thing. Otherwise, you wouldn't do it. If it's just a bunch of log reporting, maybe you're not incentivized. But if you're already paying for a third party, you want to make sure that you go through an audit every month.
Right. So an alternative way to ask the question is, if you had to pay Sentry to know about this error, would it still be an error?
Sure.
I, I think that's a great place to leave it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you all for listening. I'm Jeffrey Sherman.
And I'm Isaac Askew, and this is Never Rewrite.